Justice Neil Gorsuch saying that
who was
discrimination, yeah,
silent at oral
silent.
argument. Fascinating. So who the person who was very active was Justice Thomas. It was a topsy-turvy day.
Yeah.
Um, and also Justice Gorsuch had no concurrence.
No.
He has remained very, very interestingly quiet on this, which I again actually think could be good news, right?
I'm Kimberly Atkins Stohr, and this is Justice by Design. And if you are a listener to this podcast, I know that you, like me, are here so that we can talk about ways to build a better and more just society. And we want to talk with the people who are doing that work in order to build it. But I have to say, for all of us, the last couple of weeks have been rough. I feel the weight of it, and I know you must too. And it's very easy to be discouraged, disappointed, angry, but it's all the more reason why these discussions are so important because of the need to continue to do that work, to design a more just future for all of us. And that's why I'm really, really glad to be joined today by Sam Ames, who is a legal and policy strategist who has been doing the work to advocate for LGBTQ rights, particularly when it comes to trans youth. And given recent news, I can't think of anybody more I want to talk to more in this moment than you, Sam. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely. And you are correct. What a week to be doing it.
Yeah. So before we get started, could you just introduce yourself a little bit to our audience so that they know who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, all. My name is Sam Ames. I am a civil rights lawyer working in the LGBTQ movement for probably about 17 years now, most of that as an attorney. Um, I've got a focus on trans youth and the intersections of civil rights and mental health, which Lord knows has been up for debate and also up for quite a bit of legal developments in recent days.
So Sam and I talked, and we planned to do this podcast this week, weeks ago, knowing that the Supreme Court's opinion in Scrimeti was coming, but the timing really collided with it. I think collided is a pretty good description for how that opinion landed. As you said, even if it was expected, it's still difficult. Can you, for our listeners who still don't fully understand what the Supreme Court did, just give a
Yeah.
little overview about that ruling?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Scrimeti was a case about whether or not gender affirming care for transgender youth has any protection under the Constitution, whether banning that care, whether a state banning that care, which is a lot of what we're seeing happen right now, violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. What the court did was, luckily, I think, actually sidestep a lot of the traditional analysis on that. I'm trying to look for some silver linings here, and I actually think that the court could have done a lot more damage than it did do. But what the court did say was that the 14th Amendment does not protect transgender youth from states trying to interfere with their gender affirming care.
And in that case, as you said, it could have been worse. What they did not say categorically that uh, trans individuals do not have the same equal protection rights under the Constitution
Yeah.
as other people say when it comes to discriminating against women or against people based on their race, for example. But it still allowed states like Tennessee and I believe at this point 22, 23 other states
Yeah.
that do have similar bans. It allowed those bans to stay in place, even though it does. I don't, if you just look at it logically, if you allow things like, for example, a puberty blocker to be given to someone, a minor, because they are experiencing early puberty, for example, and you want to delay the onset of that, which is a treatment that is available, that is okay. You can deliver that care in Tennessee. The only way you cannot deliver that care is if the patient is trans. Can you talk a little bit about the impact uh, that this and other laws like this are having on the ground?
Yeah, the primary impact, and I think the primary impact of a lot of policy we're seeing, there is a definite legal impact, there's also a real chilling impact, a real fear-based impact. A lot of youth and a lot of their parents right now are so scared. We're seeing this legal sort of moving of the Overton window from restrictions that feel kind of technical to criminalization, right? We had a memo from the DOJ just a couple of months ago trying to figure out how to get at gender affirming care through criminal law, which is difficult to do with federal law, but it's a lot less difficult to do with state law, particularly around child welfare. We know that this kind of care, and we know that parental support is one of the biggest protective factors for youth mental and physical health. The idea of criminalizing that and of taking kids away from their families is something that is causing a lot of fear. So on the ground right now, what we're seeing is a lot of people trying to figure out how to deal with this in the immediate, right? We're not just talking about states that are phasing this care out. We're talking about states that are saying tomorrow your medication will no longer be your medication. That can be really dangerous when you just suddenly stop a medication that you have been on. It's one of many, many ways in which we can see the policymakers are talking about science a lot and not talking to scientists or doctors. One of the things that we hear over and over is this idea of biological sex, which is a term that is more political than it is scientific. I think any geneticist or pediatrician or anybody studying human medicine would tell you biological sex is a lot more complicated than male and female. It also leaves out a huge percentage of the population. We talk about trans kids a lot. We very rarely talk about intersex kids.
Hmm.
One of the interesting things about these state laws, including the one at issue in Skirmetti from Tennessee, is that they specifically exempt one kind of care. One thing that we know about gender affirming care for youth is that it has an incredibly, incredibly low regret rate, has a regret rate of about 1%. What we are seeing is a number of people in that 1% trotted out and used as tools for a political agenda. When you actually look at the numbers, knee surgeries have a regret rate of 6%.
Mm.
The kind of surgery that does have a huge regret rate is the non-consensual surgeries on intersex infants that are specifically exempted by these laws. What they are saying is that the regret rate of youth of babies is not actually part of this analysis. It's a political one, not a scientific one.
I'm really glad that you focused on the science of this because one aspect of the Scrimeti case, and something that was cited by the court was this idea that the research, that the science backing this sort of care is still rather inconclusive. Now, just logically to me, that seemed really extraordinary because it is only recently that we have been able to get the sort of funding commitment focus on healthcare that is directed specifically for LGBTQ people in order to get any information or data at all.
Yeah.
And there is certainly a growing body of practical and experiential evidence to show just how important and effective it is, not just in terms of medical outcomes, but in terms of mental outcomes and well-being and allowing people to survive and thrive in our society. And that seemed really to be disregarded by the court in a way that was very different, say, from the Obergefell decision on uh, marriage rights, which I'll come back to in a moment, seemed to take a lot of care on that. This seemed to all but ignore that.
Yeah, there is this pervasive and increasingly loud myth going around that I think we have not done a great job of pushing back on. The more they say it, the more it sounds like truth. This idea that the research is still out on gender affirming care for trans youth. There are decades of research about this. What we're seeing is an attempt to undermine it, right? We saw this. There was a report that came out from the Department of Health and Human Services a few months ago, an unsigned report, not even an office listed as an author, which is very rare. I worked inside the Department of Health and Human Services. That is a rare thing. And what it did was it spent about 90 pages just going through the existing research and calling it into question. But more importantly than that, almost, they had this really interesting move where they said the research is still out. It's not clear enough. The research that we have seems to say things that if you are reading this research, it doesn't say. But more importantly, the kind of research that would be needed to to protect this care is unethical to do. You can't do it. We won't fund it, and also we think that it's wrong to do. So they
That's
have
right.
this. They have set up this catch-22 where
Yep.
they are claiming there's not enough research. They are ignoring the research that does exist, and then they are saying we will defund the research that is underway, and also anything that we even aren't funding isn't possible because it violates ethical rules.
Ah, that's absolutely right. And you talked about the criminalization. I want to step back a bit because I think about this arc, this trajectory when it comes to civil rights that sort of began from Bowers v. Hardwick, which involved basically criminalizing being gay, all the way to Obergefell and even beyond to the Bostock decision, which held very reasonably that the federal law prohibiting workplace discrimination on the basis of sex or gender also applies when it comes to sexual orientation or gender identity. But suddenly it feels like there is this shift in the opposite direction. Is that me being alarmist, Sam?
It
Or,
certainly is not.
mm,
No, I don't think I cannot remember a time in recent memory when we have seen a kind of backlash to this degree, right? We got to Obergefell, and it felt like there was this real momentum in the right direction, in the direction of human dignity and civil rights and worth. And we saw this moment in the strategy there, strategy backed by some really big think tanks, and pushers of Christian nationalism in this way that was not about religion. It was not about the welfare of these youth. It was about what felt like it could get voters invested in a party and really play on fears easily. They figured out that this was the issue. We saw them push on it a little bit. We saw them figuring it out in 2017 in North Carolina with bathroom bans. We saw them pushing on different ways to do it, and they really landed on it when it came to trans youth.
why do you think that is the case? Because it part of that reason is that it got the sort of reaction and spread the sort of fear that people didn't really have when it came to same-sex relationship or ensuring that LGBTQ people are able to work without discrimination. That seems to be something that has broader public appeal, and people are not afraid of that. But they were able to make trans people, and particularly trans kids, we're talking about
Yeah,
children,
yeah.
um, some sort of scary enemy.
They sure did. And I think that that actually is the key, right? They have figured out that attacking trans people generally isn't quite as attractive as attacking trans youth. And I think there is something in there that is not only in this moment but historic, right? When you bring kids into it, it creates a different kind of feeling of protectiveness. And that can be used intentionally and insidiously. We see this going back to Anita Bryant and her campaign against gay teachers. What she said was that LGBT people couldn't reproduce naturally, and so they had to recruit, which obviously is a pernicious myth. It has nothing to do with reality, and it's also back, right? It's back in the form of this real fear mongering around grooming, which isn't just dangerous for trans youth, right? I think it's actually very, very dangerous for all youth when we start to confuse the words that we are giving kids to name what is happening to them if something bad is happening to them. What we do is we really endanger kids who are genuinely being groomed for sexual assault and sexual violence, and those exist. We start to muddy those waters, we put them at risk.
Sam, when I was reading the Scrimetti decision, one thing that came to mind immediately for me is the fact that a rallying cry for conservatives has been the need to expand parental rights, that parents should have more rights. For example, more ability to object to what books are in schools, more ability to say, no, my child will not get a vaccine. But the Scrimetti case does not seem to uh, reconcile with that at all, because it essentially says it is not the job of parents to decide what healthcare is best for their child. The state can step in and say, no, no, we know better than you. Did you get that sense as well?
Oh, absolutely. And it's interesting, we're seeing this as part of a larger political project. And we saw this in Florida a few years back. Their state Department of Health issued an advisory to doctors that included warnings against social transition. And one of the things that they use specifically is wearing the clothes and getting haircuts of the opposite sex, whatever that means. It is nuts in the same breath to say parents' rights are important and you can't get your kid a haircut. It is a specific kind of cognitive dissonance. But what's interesting is that at oral argument, Justice Barrett actually really seemed to be interested in this line of argument. Now, this actually was part of the case in the lower courts. It wasn't part of the writ that went up to the Supreme Court, but
Right.
she still seemed very interested in it, right? We wind up finding out from her concurrence that she wasn't quite as interested in the quasi-suspect class as maybe she was giving some signals, but she was giving some real signals about parental rights. And she throws in a footnote there about it, about this idea that maybe this is not protected under the 14th Amendment, but there is something about the state intruding in the family here that feels wrong.
Mhm. That, and I find that really interesting because she was among the three justices who said, as you mentioned, would have gone farther on the equal protection issue, right? Which is essentially to say, constitutionally, laws that target LGBTQ people would have to would have a higher level of constitutional scrutiny
That's right.
because of that fact. And the Supreme Court said, no, but this law doesn't do that. So we don't even have to decide that question, which, again, the law uses the word sex 19 times,
It
you know,
sure does.
for the Real Housewives watchers like me, I used a Teresa Giudice gift to like underline this fact. I don't know how you could say this law has nothing to do with sex when it uses the word sex 19 times. I'm going to flip a table. But um, but that is interesting. And there was a separate legal issue saying that it violated parental rights, but the Supreme Court did not take up that question. They only
They did
took
not.
up the equal protection question. Is that a ray of hope as challenges move forward in the future when it comes to this?
Yeah, I think that first of all, this is very bad news for healthcare. I do
Yeah.
not think it is bad news for a lot of the other areas in which we're trying to protect people. And even in the healthcare realm, I do think that Justice Roberts left some real avenues open. Parental rights is one of them. I'm not sure about the ACLU strategy right now, but in theory, they could appeal that lower court issue of parental rights up again. Not sure they want to before this court, but it is possible. And if we don't bring those cases, the other side will, and they're
Mm-hmm.
going to bring cases that are much different on the facts, right?
Yeah.
I think that he left a couple of things open. He talked about this not. He gave signals that if this were a
The
ban that
Chief
was
Justice
not. I'm
who
sorry.
wrote the
Yes,
opinion.
the Chief
Yes.
Justice who wrote the opinion gave some indications that if this were not age limited, it would not pass muster with him. He gave some indications that if this were about social transition, it wouldn't pass muster with him. I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's good news. And he also really, really importantly didn't so much touch the scrutiny question. A lot of this case hinged on the scrutiny question, right? So we know that certain classifications from states, we are inclined to be different levels of nervous about whether they are classifying for good reasons or not. And the strictest form of scrutiny applies generally to race-based classification. Intermediate scrutiny generally applies to sex-based classification, and everything else gets rational basis, which is uh, I'm not sure which justice said it, that the court can't prevent legislatures from making stupid laws. It can just prevent them from making discriminatory ones.
Yeah.
So the argument was that this should be a sex-based classification, and as you say, the word sex was brought up 19 times in the law under the reasoning of Bostock just a couple of years ago.
Yeah,
If
that was the employment discrimination case written
it was
by Justice Neil Gorsuch, saying that
who was
discrimination, yeah,
silent at oral
silent.
argument. Fascinating. So who the person who was very active was Justice Thomas. It was a topsy-turvy day.
Yeah.
Um, And also Justice Gorsuch had no concurrence.
No.
He has remained very, very interestingly quiet on this, which I again actually think could be good news, right? His
Hmm.
logic in Bostock, something that Thomas and Alito took such umbrage with in the concurrence section. Um, it is so difficult to get around this being a but-for sex classification. As you said, a kid can get a kind of medication if they are assigned male at birth. They cannot get that kind of medication if they are assigned female at birth. You just can't get around that being about
No.
sex, except to say, but that can't possibly be what they meant, which is the same arguments we have seen used against LGBTQ people in the courts for decades now.
So, where do we go from here? I mean, we are here at the end of Pride Month. We are here at the 10-year anniversary since the Obergefell ruling. Um, and we are seeing, as we mentioned, the arc of history being bent away from justice after it looked like it was being bent toward it. What is the work now? What are you focused on moving forward in order to protect people, particularly trans youth, the most vulnerable population? I mean, trans people broadly, they are more likely to be in danger of taking their own lives. They're more likely to be in danger of being assaulted. They are more likely to be in danger of not getting the healthcare that they need to survive. And then you take all of that and put that on children to boot. What is the next move in order to broaden the protections, or maybe try to find some ways to get the kind of victories and seek out the nuance from this court that we've been talking about?
I think that there are options, right? This does not shut down every option. It just doesn't even shut down every option when it comes to gender affirming care. I think part
Hmm.
of the work is is convincing people not to comply in advance. There's a lot of fear right now, particularly in institutions. We saw the LA Children's Hospital just shut down their entire gender affirming care department. Clinics
Yeah.
have been doing that over and over before being asked to. And I understand that there is a risk resistance, especially in institutions. And right now, when this presidential administration first started, we saw it almost immediately. There was an enormous chilling effect. We saw it a lot in law firms, right? I actually think law firms are very, very illustrative here.
Yes.
Especially in the beginning, law firms were racing to get on the good side, to comply in advance,
Yeah.
uh, to make deals such that they would not be the ones in the crosshairs.
Right. Law
And the
schools,
truth is,
colleges. Yes.
yeah, the truth is
Hmm.
we all are. And it wasn't until these law firms got together and started talking and building a coalition that they could really push back. I think that law firms talk about risk averse. That is a real risk averse group of institutions.
Yes.
Nobody wanted to be the first to say no. Not everybody can be Harvard with a $40 billion endowment, right?
Right.
No one wanted to be the first to say no, but when they came together, had conversation, and built a coalition of hundreds, it allowed them to be stronger. I think that
Hmm.
seeing that from our healthcare institutions, from our schools right now, can be enormously powerful. Also, sorry, go ahead, go ahead.
No, please continue.
I think a lot of the work is going to be returning to local level, turning to protecting the kids in our lives and around us, mutual aid. I think it's actually important to contextualize, particularly with this community, that it's really, really recent that we have started looking to the state for the validation of who we are and help becoming and maintaining that. For most of our history, the state has not been our friend in that, and the thing is, we've been here anyway. We have been here since the beginning of history. They have never once managed to get rid of us. And the truth is, we are just part of being human, and we will always be here. And there is a certain kind of value in remembering our ancestors and our elders right now, the things that they have come through, and how they responded when the government was ignoring an epidemic going through the community and killing hundreds of thousands of
Yeah.
people. That we have gone back, we have resisted violence, and we have joined arms with other communities resisting that violence, saying our existence is not predicated on your approval. We are here, and we're going to keep taking care of each other because that is what we do.
I really, really appreciate that point. And just to underscore that, the state does not define who we are as people. and we need not have the affirmation from the state as to who we are as people, as a descendant of enslaved people, who were not considered uh, citizens, who were barely considered human under the law in this nation. I feel that greatly. And I think that is something that can really resonate with people, to help people who are not within these communities understand the importance in fighting for this. Something that you said before, Sam, that I really appreciated too, to that extent. We talk a lot about representation and why it matters. And I think people sort of get it, but you made the case that no matter the outcome in the Scrimeti case, whatever the Supreme Court did, they had to do it looking in the face of a trans person, because this case was argued very well by Chase Strangio, who we believe is the first transgender attorney to argue a case at the U.S. Supreme Court. Talk about the importance of that.
Oh man, yeah, Chase had an impossible job and did a phenomenal job with
Yeah.
it, right? And I know that he has taken an enormous amount of heat for that, as though he is the sole architect of every legal strategy in the movement, which is just not true.
I
I
know.
love Chase, but he doesn't have that much power. um, what he did was in an impossible position. He showed up, and I worked. I have worked in the last administration, and I can remember those really difficult conversations around Title IX, around protecting trans youth, and how far you can go and how far you can't go. And you don't win every one of those arguments in the room. You never can. But I think that there is something so important about before somebody is going to make a decision that causes harm to a community, they have to look into the eyes of that person or somebody in that community. I think that there is an ethical argument to be made for that being necessary. I was the only person, I was the only out trans person in the building. Um, there are rooms
Wow.
that you never know you're going to walk into, and it's going to be important that someone have to look you in the eye first. And they had to look Chase in the eye first. They had to look at someone they were going to harm. And I hope that there is an inner reckoning with that this was a hard decision for someone. I hope that this was a hard decision for someone.
And I hope that also makes it easier for people who care about justice to lock arms and realize that this is something that we need broad support from,
That's right.
and to, in order to bend that arc of history back toward a more just outcome. Sam Ames, thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you drawing some attention to this. Lord knows we have lost so much support. The fear mongering has been so effective. And I just want to say, uh, beware of anyone saying they're coming to save your kids. I don't care who they are. I don't know any time in history that has ever been an authentic argument.
Right?
Mhm.
Right? So yes, I often joke that a lot of the groups, including the legal groups, conservative groups that are so are pushing so hard to take people's rights away, tend to have like rights in its name, or
Mhm.
or like liberty, or things like that. And it's like, beware, if it's a group talking about liberty, check them out,
Check them
because
out.
that might not be what you think it is.
Always check your sources.
Always
Always.
check. Sam Ains, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thanks to all of you for listening and watching Justice by Design. If you could do us a big favor and follow this podcast wherever you get your pods, follow it on YouTube where you can find the videos, and give a good rating, because that helps other people find this important podcast. I'm trying to bring light to ways that people are working on the ground, community by community, in order to make this a better world. And I need your help to do that too. I'm Kimberly Atkins Stohr. I'll see you next week on Justice by Design.